Welcome to Defining Behavior. Before we can change student behavior, we need to define that behavior. In fact, defining behavior is the first step in supporting student behavior. Now, some people may say, why take the time to define behavior? But it's vital to define behavior in clearly observable terms in order to measure progress. So what do I mean by observable? Well, observable behaviors can be seen. It might help you to imagine the observer as a camera. Other behaviors are more easily heard, and so imagine them as being recorded by a tape recorder. In both cases, the recording device is unable to give a subjective opinion about the behavior. Good observers know this. They don't give their opinions, they just record the facts. So let's look at some examples. Off task isn't really observable until we add crawls on floor, taps pencil, or plays with objects in desk. Then we know that this woman is off task. Making our descriptions measurable allows us to count and quantify, which makes it much easier to figure out if our strategies are working. This is particularly important as we're working as part of a team to control and change behavior. Phrases like disrupts other students' learning become measurable when we add descriptors like tapping neighbors on shoulders, grabbing peers' materials, doodles on neighbor's paper, or whispers to neighbor. Phrases like uses profanity become measurable when we add uses words referencing toileting, or referencing sex, or referencing deity. Operational definitions. Andrew wanders around is not operational. Andrew leaves his assigned seat during instruction without permission is operational and can be seen and recorded by various separate observers. What is the frequency, duration, and/or intensity of the behavior? Frequency refers to the number of times a behavior occurs. Many times I've heard teachers say, he's always out of his seat. And yet when we conduct an observation, we discover he's only out of his seat 3 or 4 times. Maybe too many times for that teacher, but the actual number will help us track the student's improvement. Duration refers to the length of time a behavior occurs. There's a very big difference between a 5-second behavior and a 2-minute behavior. Intensity is a little more difficult to measure, and so creating an assigned numerical scale may help quantify it. If you've been to the doctor or urgent care recently, you may have been asked to rate your pain intensity on a scale from 1 to 10. Communicating a number helps caregivers determine how soon and how much help you need. So how do we keep track of all of this behavior? You guessed it, we use data.
Frequency recording, or tally recording, is simply tallying how many times something happened. So we would use frequency recording if we wanted to know how many times a student did something like raise their hand, talk out, go to the bathroom, etc. How many times it happened is a frequency that we're looking for. We want to make sure when we're using frequency recording that we are looking at behaviors that are the same length approximately. If the behavior sometimes happens for only a second and other times can happen for minutes at a time, then it doesn't make sense to count them. If one time a behavior happened and it lasted for an hour and we said there was 1, on another day it happened for a minute and there were 2, saying that it happened more on one day because there were 2 doesn't really make sense. So they need to be of equal duration. The big advantage we have when we use frequency recording is that it's very direct. It's us watching and recording exactly what happens. Also, if you know what time it was when you started and what time it was when you ended, you can convert it to a rate. If it happened 2 times during a minute that you watched, you could say it happened 2 times per minute. So the big disadvantage is you've got to watch the student all the time. It takes direct attention from you to do it if you're going to use frequency. Material-wise, it's pretty simple. You need a pencil and paper to tally, or you need paper clips that you put in one pocket and pull them out every time one happens and put that in the other pocket, count them up later. Or it could be a golf counter, but it's very simple. The label you're going to have for your data when you're done is either number of times or number of times per minute.
Class, the other day we were doing some reading on Ellis Island, so we're just going to do sort of a brief question answer on this actual piece of paper regarding Ellis, okay? So here we go. Please raise your hands if you know the answers. Ellis Island was the immigration station in, you can tell me
I know that
where
one.
might
I know
be.
that one.
Austin?
New York.
That is correct. Over 12 million immigrants from all over the world entered
When's
the country
lunch?
through Ellis Island. The island that is now Ellis Island was purchased by a local resident named
Oh, I know.
Anybody?
Can you repeat?
Evan.
Samuel Ellis.
That's correct, in 1774. When immigration became the responsibility of the federal government in the late 1800s,
Food.
officials wanted a federal immigration station to be built on Ellis Island.
Okay, so as you saw on the form, when you're done with this at the end of the observation period, all you're going to do is count up all those paper clips or count up all those tallies, and you're going to put them on the form in the blank. Now, if tomorrow you want to do this for a short period of time or maybe for a longer period of time, all you have to do is divide the number you got by the total number of minutes you observed, and that gives you rate per minute. Now it doesn't matter how long you do it any other day, it's standardized, so you're always going to have rate per minute. Latency recording is another type of duration recording. We're recording the amount of time it takes for a student to do something after we've given them a prompt or request. So we might want to know how long did it take that student to start cleaning up once we said cleanup time. We might want to know how long it takes the student to get to work once we say it's work time. In all of those cases, what we're doing is taking a stopwatch, and when we say something or when we give a direction, we start that watch. And we keep it running until the student engages in the behavior. And when they do, we stop the watch and we record that amount of time. We do that repeatedly, and in the end what we do is we add all of those up to get an average. Now, the big advantage of using latency recording is that in latency recording we can look at how long it takes something to happen. The disadvantage is you need to use a timer, and you have to be watching continuously once you give that direction. However, if you know when you're going to give the direction, you control when you're going to take that data. In the end, your label is going to be the average latency, or amount of time it took that student to engage in the behavior we directed.
The Central High School boosters sell snacks and beverages at school functions. You can use the distributive property to calculate the total cost when multiple items are purchased. I would like you to then turn to page 14, and please begin work on numbers 1 through 17. You can begin your work now. Yeah, give that a shot, all right? Good work.
So what you just saw was a teacher recording the latency for a student one time. Sometimes that's what you do, is every day you give this certain direction to a student and you record the latency. Other times you might give directions for different things multiple times during the day. It depends on the student. But in this case, this is something the teacher's going to do every day when the direction is given to get to work.
Requires continuous observation once a request has been made and requires a timing device. So in the considerations, if the teacher can provide the prompts, then he or she can control when monitoring is to occur.
I'm sure the school district supplies fancy iPads and paper clips like that, you know?
Fancy paper clips?
Yeah.
Oh, this was not playing. I thought I played it. Okay, I thought so. Oh my gosh. I lost it.
Is that just their logo every time?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Let me flip this around. Okay, discontinuous data measurement. So the other one was continuous. So you have frequency, duration, and latency. It's continuous. It continues to happen. Like the duration doesn't stop, the latency doesn't stop, and then you can count how many times something occurs. Discontinuous data measurement is, here is partial interval. Did we do this last time? Partial interval? Or do I just remember this from last time I trained? Maybe. Okay, so there's partial interval. We'll get to it. Whole interval. And then there's momentary time sampling. So, partial interval is when you have, let's say for a 10-minute block, you're taking measurement, even if you do a 2-minute block. We'll do 10 minutes just because it's easy. Okay, so we have 10-minute interval and 10-minute interval. That's your time period that you're looking at and taking data. If a behavior happens at all during that 10-minute period, then you mark it. It could happen within the first 30 seconds, and you mark it, and you don't have to mark anymore. You can continue on doing with whatever you're doing. For the whole interval, it's exactly what it sounds like. They have to do something the entire time for the whole 10-minute period. With momentary time sampling, you're going to look at the child at the end of the 10 minutes to see if they are doing that behavior. So it's just a snapshot. It's just a one moment time. Look at them in 10 minutes. Did they do it? Okay.
Like, are they doing it right then and there?
Yes.
Okay.
At that 10-minute time. So that's again, that is typically what teachers will use, a momentary time sampling in their classroom. Though, when I would teach, I would look around because you have 30 kids in your classroom. Well, you can't constantly look at all 30 kids to see if they're all working, but I'm going to look at each kid, every minute. So after every minute, I'll look at the first kid in the seat and see, okay, is he working? At the end of the second minute, I'll look at the next kid. So I'm just going to look at each kid to see if they are on task. You use whole interval recording when you want to reduce the behavior. If you want the behavior to decrease, you want to use a whole interval. If one of our kids is having a meltdown for an entire 10 minutes, that needs to be decreased. So we are using a whole interval. For the partial interval, it's used when you want to increase the behavior. So did they, for 10 minutes, it's going to underestimate the behavior, right? So it's like, no, it's going to overestimate, I'm sorry. It happened. Oh, it happened one time. It's going to overestimate. Am I getting those backwards? 1 second. partial overestimates, whole underestimates. The video will clarify, but yes. So if the behavior is only happening one time in that 10 minutes, you want to increase it. Okay, we'll watch the partial interval first.
Partial interval makes it seem like there's more or less.
It makes it seem like there is more. More.
Yeah.
It overestimates.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yes.
Interval recording is when we use a clock or a timer to tell us when to record. Normally we're recording when we see a behavior. In interval recording, we let the clock or timer signal tell us to now record. There are two ways we could do this. The first one's called partial interval recording. In partial interval recording, we're going to record if the behavior occurred at any time during that interval, even for a second. So we start our timer and we start observing the student. As we observe the student, every time we look over there, look at them, if they're engaging in that behavior at all, we know we're going to say yes at the end of that interval. The interval comes to an end, we put a yes or a plus mark, and we start watching again. And we do that through the whole period at every interval. Now, why would we want to use partial interval system? Well, our big advantage is it allows us to account for really low rate behaviors. Those behaviors that don't happen very often, this will capture them. And once we see the behavior, we don't have to keep watching, so that makes it more efficient for us. The disadvantage is, it's going to tend to overestimate the behavior. It's just an approximation, and you've got to use that timer. Still, when you set that timer to go, you're not going to have to watch all the time, so this is more efficient than simply doing some sort of a duration or a frequency count. Now, the label on this is always going to be percentage of intervals. What percentage of intervals did we see that behavior? It's not percentage of time, because we don't know about all the time. All we know is during what percentage of intervals did we see that behavior.
Boys and girls, you have in front of you a math riddle, all right? So you're going to take and answer each math problem, compare the answer you get to the letters down below, and put the letters up on top, okay? All right, begin.
You'll notice in that last video of the partial interval, the teacher's watching the student. When the student is off task, the teacher knows at that point they don't need to keep looking at the student. They wait for that buzzer to go off. When the buzzer goes off and says your time is up, then they record. So once they notice that the behavior has occurred, they don't have to keep watching through the entire interval.
See. I don't want to read through this since this was such a confusing thing for me, but make sure you guys get this part. So when the teacher does, when to use it when the teacher does not have time to observe continuously, but wishes to get an approximation of the degree to which the student engages in a low frequency behavior. How to use it. Define the behavior and interval length, then you observe. At the end of each interval, record whether the behavior occurred at any time during the interval. At the end of the observation period, count up all the positive occurrences and divide by the total intervals observed to get the percentage of intervals in which the behavior occurred. For example, percent of intervals in which a student was in seat during reading, in which they were writing in their journal, engaged in conflict with others at recess. The advantages, they're good with low rate behavior, so those that occur infrequently, and it minimizes observation of the student. So if a teacher has lots of students, then they don't have to worry about all of their focus on one person. The disadvantage is the approximation of behavior. It will tend to overestimate and requires a timing device. So, I mean, you don't want to overestimate if a child is reading. Like, if they're really not reading very often and you're overestimating that they are, what benefit is that for the child? If they are engaged in conflict with others at recess and it only happens once in a while, I would find that perfectly fine to use to overestimate because you don't want it to occur at all anyway. But the writing in the journal and the reading, I don't think that would be appropriate to overestimate that behavior.
Wait, why?
Is there such a thing to overestimate? Would you want?
Yeah, do you want them
Do you
to
want
not?
that? I mean, when you're asking them to read, why would you want to overestimate that they're doing it? I would want more accurate. So that's where your whole interval is definitely going to be. Maybe it'll get to it, but it underestimates the behavior. So I would want to make sure that we're using that for a child that should be reading for 5 minutes. Because if they're not reading for that 5 minutes, it's going to mark it incorrect. And it's going to underestimate that they're doing this. Well, I need them to be reading. So that's when it really depends on what behavior you're focusing on. So the considerations, the shorter the interval, the more accurate the data will be, but more work will be required by the observer. The interval length should be set to approximate baseline rates of the behavior. So if we think the behavior tends to occur every 10 minutes, then 5 to 10 minute intervals make sense. You always want to make sure you don't go higher than what the baseline is. If the behavior occurs on a high frequency, then the momentary interval recording is indicated. So we'll get to that one. Hold on, I will get to momentary.
What grade did you teach, Anne?
First, second, and fifth. Those are my own classrooms. And then I had, when I was at Steps, I did all the way up to 7th. I did 1st through 7th.
The second type of interval recording system we have is called momentary interval recording. Momentary interval recording means we only record at the very end of the interval whether the behavior is happening at that very moment in time. So we might be looking at whether the student is on task doing what they're supposed to do. The time goes by, and at the very end of that interval, we'd look, and if they are on task, we'd put a plus. If they're off, we'd put a 0. But it's only for that very moment in time. Or we might look to see whether the student is engaged in some other task we've asked them to do. And we look at the very end of the interval. If they are, we put a plus. If they're not, we put a 0. Now, why would we want to look at momentary interval recording? We look at it because it provides us with a couple of big advantages. One is, I only have to look at the student at the very end of the interval. At no other time do I need to look. But the second is, this is really only useful for us when we're talking about really high rate behaviors. This allows us to look at those really high rate behaviors and not get 100% every time, because we're only looking at whether it happened at the end of that interval. So the disadvantage is it will tend to underestimate the behavior, but that works for us if we're looking at really high rate behaviors. Every time we do this, our label is going to be the percentage of intervals in which that behavior occurred.
Okay, those things that he's saying at the end, the labels, like,
Okay, so the labels means the graph. So you guys don't really have to worry about the label part. You probably will have to know the parts of a graph and the labels. So you have your X and your X and your Y. And your X is always your time. So it could be, I always do days, the dates, and then your Y is your instances of behavior, which is the label would be the percentage of intervals.
Okay.
That would be your label.
I'll need a visual, but yes. No, you don't.
I will find a visual
Yes,
for you.
I know.
Oops.
Okay.
Okay, folks, today we're going to continue our creative writing assignment that we started yesterday. And remember, this is on something that you guys wanted to write about. So I'm expecting some really great stories. So go ahead and continue. If you have any questions, just raise your hand, let me know. I'll be right here. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Because look, it says on-task behavior refers to engaging in behaviors related to the instructional task.
Examples.
Examples include staying in seat during independent work.
But
That's not the same thing. It says related to the instructional task. And it says examples. That means more than one?
I only see one.
I only see one.
And it doesn't exemplify.
No.
Huh.
So remember, on Momentary, like you just saw, we only record if the student is engaged in the behavior at the very end of the interval. So you saw an interval where the student was out of her seat almost the whole time, but at the very end was sitting in the seat, and the teacher recorded it as in seat. On another one, the student was in seat almost the entire interval, but at the very end got out, and the teacher recorded it as a 0, not in seat. In Momentary, we only record what happens at the very end of that interval. Very end of that interval.
However, the target behavior was not in seat. The target
Right.
behavior was on task. Two different things. I'm not reading this because that just made me all mad. Oh, that's frustrating. That's why it's important to define your target behavior. Right there, classic example. What not to do.
What not to do.
Okay. Almost done. Permanent product. It is measurement, something that was left behind in the environment, and you can count it. So, when I was at STEPS, instead of having the kids doing state testing, I had to create a portfolio of them and have permanent products.
Oh my gosh.
For every single standard.
Oh
So,
my
let me tell you how fun this was. So we had to make all kinds of different, and they had to have pictures that went with it, like of them. Like I had to take a picture of them doing that specific, so they knew I wasn't making it. So I have lots of pictures of my friends making their work. But a permanent product is really, it's like this. Pull this out because this is quick to grab. And it was. I had it yesterday. Oh man, where'd it go? Forest figures.
Is it like your science fair backboard? What are you talking about?
No, it was from Ariana. drawing of her person.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I have pictures
Did
of
you
that.
take it?
No, I didn't take it.
Anyway, Ariana drew a person yesterday, and Dina made a note on it and then dated it. That's a permanent product. It is something that was left behind in the environment, and you can count it. I can prove Ariana drew a person.
Do you have
That's a permanent product.
picture of her doing it?
However, I can't prove it because I lost it. It's somewhere.
I have a picture of her person.
It was on the back of the worksheet or something. I remember looking at it Thursday with you.
I didn't see it. Did I?
Yeah.
I wasn't here Wednesday.
No, but no, she drew it Thursday. Whatever.
Whatever, moving
She
on.
made the permanent product. So a permanent product is just something that they can make and create. Another example Dina made had Marino Stew son. She had him rip out the yellow
I
and
saw
orange.
that, yeah.
That's a permanent product.
So art is...
Sure, absolutely. Anything, any schoolwork, any kind of item that is produced by that person is a permanent product. Here's your example, Brett, of your labels. Okay, so down at the bottom are your dates. So here it's labeled. Oh, it has 24 hours. This label is 24 hours.
Oh, it's on military time.
Oh, for crying out loud. It's not even labeled correctly. 24 hours. No, this should be dates. Because these are all different dates. This is not within 24 hours. If it was 24 hours at the bottom, it would have 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Anyway, so it should be dates at the bottom. This is your title, right? So individual's demonstration of the target behavior. Here's your key. You have your blue is target 1, your red is your replacement for that behavior. I'm gonna have to go in front of the camera and
The bottom is X and the...
right, so across the bottom is X, and that's always your time. So here is, they say hours, but it's dates. So it's your dates, and then Y is up, going up, and that is, and I always write frequency or instances of behavior. I usually do instances of behavior because it sounds better. But these are your labels. So, and then we have a solid line, and that's your condition line. So with, here's a perfect example. One of our kiddos masters one of my goals, and let's see if I can find it real quick. It is a solid line.
I'd like to see that teacher do her paperclip trick.
That would be fun.
Here.
I wish I could remember what one it was.
Remember Ariana's did it, the counting, the 1 to 5. Is that the same line?
I don't. Did I draw a line in hers?
Yeah.
Let's see. I did. Good. Okay. So here's hers. So here's our dates. Here's the instances, and then here's our graph. And then once it changes, right, we have a solid line. It's not supposed to go through, but there's an example of. So here's 1
Sorry,
through
I'm
5.
on top of you.
But so that's where.
What do you mean when it changes?
So when the condition changes. So she went from numbers 1 through 5, and now we're doing numbers 1 through 10 because she can do 1 through 5. Let me find. The
Oh,
one
okay.
She mastered
for
that.
Gotcha,
him,
okay.
because I know his is for sure correct because he mastered it, and then I drew the line and we're ready.
So
to
can I
move on.
think of these as master lines?
Hold
sort
on. Don't look at that too close because I didn't. It's not graphed completely correct.
are you letting pass?
I hear noises.
Sure, show off your phone. I feel like we're missing one.
Where did it go?
On your phone.
No!
Oh
And
man.
I realized that
Guess
after
I don't know where it is
digging
now.
through everything in my car on the
I
way
know
here,
I
it was
drew a
just
line
safe,
for
you
his
know.
too.
Nope.
My phone, I make sure I have.
I have no
my
idea
make sure
where it
it's
is.
my wallet.
Yeah, because you can pay for things on your phone.
What?
We're talking about the importance of having your electronic devices.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know. I'm not
Just look
stressed.
how focused you are now.
Uh-huh, yeah.
So yeah, so you have your condition line. So here you have the first line. The first section was baseline, so there was no intervention at all.
Okay.
They just took the baseline data of what was
What
going
you could
on.
do, or count, whatever.
Yeah. So then the second, there's a line here, and this label says med change. So they have medication now.
Oh.
No, we should know those things. Anyway, so the medication. So our target behavior all of a sudden increased. No bueno. Then BSP staff training. So then they had some staff training on the replacement behavior because the replacement behavior has not been working. The behavior is getting worse and the replacement behavior is not working. Well, then we train the staff. Oh, voila. The staff knows what they're doing. Now this is the replacement behavior is going up and the problem behavior is going down. You will always see behavior will get worse before it gets better, and you will always see it will shoot back up out of nowhere. For everyone across the board, it is a spontaneous recovery. They remember that something used to work, and they're going to try it again, and it is imperative that we still remember the original plan, because if we miss that chance, we're doomed. Because then they're going to fight back even harder, and it will take even longer to get rid of that behavior that we got rid of the first time.
What do you call that when it gets worse before it gets better?
Extinction burst.
Yeah.
It's an extinction burst. They're pushing harder and harder. So it's because we are trying to extinguish or get rid of that behavior completely. So it's a burst of that behavior.
I love it. I love that word.
Yeah, it's fun.
And then what is it called when it just randomly shows up?
Spontaneous recovery.
Mm.
Okay, are there any questions?
Do you have an example of a spontaneous recovery?
Yes. Specifically with MH.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we went through, it was a good 2 months with Dina. 2 months that, he pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally now they're like this, right? So, but a couple weeks ago, he aggressed to her again, and she's like, "What? I don't know what happened. I thought we were making progress." And I said, just wait, hold off. It's okay. 2 days later, he was back. He was fine. He remembered that this table's back in this room. Wait a second. I used to clear the table and bite her shirt. I'm going to try it again. And it did. He did, for a couple days. It was like 2 days, and then it was gone. Now he has another therapist. He's doing the same thing. And we keep telling her, just wait. It's okay. Because Dina's already put in the work.
You just need to maintenance.
It won't last as long because he knows that it didn't work for me and it didn't work for Dina, and it's not going to work for her. So it's just we have to make sure we're consistent because he will try. I don't know how long he's going to try with you because it's a totally different environment. I'm very, very curious to see what goes on. I don't know.
Me too.
Yeah, he only had one tantrum when I was there. And
Yeah.
it was just because I actually don't know why he got mad.
What did the tantrum look like?
We were building a train track, and I don't think he liked the way it turned out. So he just started picking it up and throwing it, and he yelled. But it only lasted like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And then he got over it, and then he just did something else.
So there you go. And we have to keep in mind the kid's 3. He's a 3-year-old boy. 3's just stink overall. 3's worse than 2, and he's a boy. And
Yeah.
when a train track doesn't come out the way it's supposed to, you're gonna get mad and whatever. You're gonna throw it. So who knows? You know, if that's a typical thing, you'll see, and it might be because he's a 3-year-old boy.
I can't believe they're so young. I didn't
Mhm.
realize they were that young.
Teeny tiny little guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've never seen him in tantrum mode at all, ever. Isn't that crazy?
Because when that we know it's a possibility, he was in the smaller room, so that he wouldn't hurt any child.
That's why she was like almost weeping when they played the duck game.
Yeah. Because that was one of his first times in a large room and playing
Wow.
with another kid. And having fun, like joking. Like
Yeah.
they were, I mean, for
I have
both
a
of them, it's
green
huge.
one.
It was a huge deal. She spent 2 months in that little closet room for 2 hours every day, not knowing what to do. And there's only so much I can do. Like I can't be in there because they can't depend on me. You guys can't depend on me. You have to just take what I've tried to teach you and use it, and you'll develop your own way of bonding with that kid, and you'll use the ABA skills, and but I can't be there. And it sucks, but it's like, I have faith. You guys can do